Well, Rabbonim, Excellencies, President, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true pleasure to be here tonight. I flew in from New York overnight, and I really feel uplifted and inspired by the people that I've seen here tonight. This really is an exceptional gathering of people, and maybe the place to start is to explain why I was so keen to come here tonight. First, it allows me to applaud my former colleague in the Foreign Office, Gilly Merron. I have to tell you, she was an insightful, effective, determined minister, and I'm really thrilled, Gilly, that you are proving to be such an extraordinary Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies. I can't think of a better place for you to be leading today. It allows me, too, to recognise the extraordinary leadership team led by Jonathan Arkush and all of the deputies here from all across Britain who do so much to represent communities the length and breadth of this land. Thank you for what you do every day, every week across this country. I also wanted to be here because there are so many friends, former colleagues, acquaintances that I've got to know over the years. It allows me to reconnect, to retain connection. Because over the years, the community has welcomed me, has been open with me, has discussed with me, has informed me. And I was privileged to be offered the chance to say thank you for that. I want to say a particular word to the parliamentarians who are here tonight, because all of you are flying the flag for a more inclusive Britain in your presence here tonight and in the work you do. And although it is invidious to pick out individuals, I do want to say that when John Mann started the Parliamentary Committee on Anti-Semitism, he was ahead of his time. And he's pursued that cause with a real vigour that I think is admirable. There's one other reason why I wanted to be here tonight. It's that this speech allows me, 2 weeks before Passover, which celebrates the single greatest liberation drama of all times, to discuss with you the modern exodus of people fleeing to Europe from around the world. And the thoughts I want to share with you tonight center around two words that I think have a special resonance for so many in this room and for so many others that you represent. Those words are fleeing and rebuilding. In this season, above all others, there is, I believe, a very important argument that has to be made. It's an argument core to the Passover story, and it's an argument which speaks to the mission of the International Rescue Committee, which I now lead, which is to help people whose lives have been shattered by conflict and disaster survive, recover, and gain control of their lives. Where better to make an argument about fleeing and rebuilding, the trauma of displacement and the joy of renewal, than to the Board of Deputies? Nearly 260 years young, constantly renewing itself, convening, bridge building across the diverse elements of Anglo Jewry, with deep roots in this country, a commitment to Jewish freedoms, and a conscience that never forgets the rest of the world. America and Americans rightly congratulate themselves, often, on the depth of their philanthropic generosity. But in truth, I didn't need to live in New York to learn about compassion and openness and philanthropy. Because those virtues are practiced right here, in this country, every day by Jewish communities across Britain, in ways which I've come to learn about and profoundly respect. Over the years, I have toured schools, attended synagogues, spoken with young and with old. I've seen youth movements and care homes. I've defended your students. I've even had occasional differences of opinion with your representatives. But I've always known that this is a community which knows exactly from whence it came and for what it stands. Out of ashes, hope, out of hatred, understanding, and out of exclusion, integration. So where better than the Board of Deputies to come and talk about those who are fleeing and rebuilding around the world today, than to a community who once knew the perils of flight and has now, as you can see around you, rebuilt in such extraordinary ways. This is what I want to say to you tonight. I want to say that there is a global crisis, a true exodus of people fleeing violence that is straining all societies, from Kenya to Afghanistan to Jordan, to the very heart of Europe. I want to say to you that the Jewish people know the story of flight all too well. But more important, the Jewish people also have profound lessons to teach about rebuilding. And thirdly, I want to say to you too that this crowded planet of ours needs people to speak up for our common humanity. Because I don't need to tell you that the siren voices of exclusion are at our door. And in that vein, let me say this, right at the outset. Some of the most painful conversations that I've had over 2 years living in New York are when New Yorkers say to me, tell me, should I be worried about anti-Semitism in Europe? And of course, the answer has to be yes. The outbreaks of modern anti-Semitism are repulsive. But the response can't be to turn away. It must be to engage, not ignore. And in doing so, in engaging, not ignoring, we make critical commitments to highlight and expose the perpetrators and what they stand for, to fight and to defeat their ideas, and to build coalitions of support that are enduring. Anti-Semitism is not and should not be the Jewish community's fight alone. It is everyone's fight, everyone's responsibility. Because it is an assault on all humanity, it is for all humanity to withstand. And in doing so, we have a responsibility to cross party loyalties, cross religious faith lines, and cross ethnic backgrounds. And this is to me so important because there's a wider lesson as well. Just as the fight against anti-Semitism is not just for the Jewish community, so the Jewish community has something to contribute to the fight against all forms of discrimination. And I want to tell you why and how I was reminded of this lesson. It came to me through the words and pictures of the remarkable visit of Chief Rabbi Mervis to visit refugees in Greece last November. I spoke with the Chief Rabbi before he went, and I was truly moved by his commitment not to be something or to say something, but to do something. And to do something based on a real understanding of the situation there. And when he went to meet those refugees who've lost everything. We work, the International Rescue Committee, on Lesbos, where half the refugees arriving in Europe have arrived over the last year or so. These are people who've lost everything. And when he went there, he didn't just go as the UK's chief rabbi. He became a voice of shared humanity for those of all faiths and none. He understood that the vast human tragedy unfolding in front of us crossed those lines of race and religion. He spoke against what Pope Francis has described in a remarkably resonant and troubling phrase, the globalization of indifference. Chief Rabbi Mervis stood against the globalization of indifference when he said this: until you see with your own eyes, you can't grasp the work that is being done. I've been thinking about our past, our Jewish past and journey, and thinking about our sadness. They, the refugees he met, are humans just like we are. They have babies just like we do. Those powerful words turn statistics into human stories, but also they do something that I think is very important indeed. They honor the Jewish past and they apply its lessons to the present and the future. And for me, that has been the story of the Jewish community in Britain and around the world for centuries. Nowhere does that story of honoring the Jewish past and applying its values to the present and to the future become more profound than when it speaks to stories of fleeing and rebuilding. After all, for centuries, none have experienced the trauma of fleeing quite like the Jewish people. as Lord Sachs has written, it's not just history, it's our story. So many in this room have heard parents or grandparents tell their own story of abandoning home, life, family. Some knew it themselves. They know what it means to lose everything. They know the moral and not just the material cost of hatred and of war. And they know too what it means to renew and to resettle. Wherever Jews have fled, they've set about restoring life, building schools as well as synagogues, earning citizenship, building businesses, running for office, creating charities. Everywhere they have gone, they have put down new roots without forgetting their own history. And in doing so, they have become their own light unto nations. Today, there are more people desperately fleeing conflict than ever before. Let me just say that again. More people fleeing conflict than ever before. Literally running for their lives. Last year, more than 20 million people became refugees as a result of conflict around the world. 40 million people more fled their homes but stayed inside their own home country. That means 1 in every 120 people on the planet has been displaced by conflict. A population the size of Britain fleeing and rebuilding. In Syria, 5 million refugees and 7 million internally displaced. From Afghanistan, 2.6 million refugees. From South Sudan, the world's newest nation, 750,000. And this is where I have to tell you that the personal and the professional come together. There were a number of reasons why I joined the IRC 2.5 years ago. I thought that the issues were important and neglected. The organization, I felt, had extraordinary potential. There was the minor matter of having managed to lose 2 elections in 2010, which was rather a push from the UK as well as a pull to the US. But there was also the personal factor that Gilly referred to in passing. Both my parents knew about fleeing and rebuilding. My dad came here as a 16-year-old in 1940, for reasons you can guess from Brussels in Belgium. My mum survived the war in Poland and came here as a girl in 1946. Fleeing and rebuilding was the background music to my childhood. I felt that in a small way, my joining the IRC could close a personal circle, repaying a small part of the debt my family owed to those who helped us by offering support to those who are fleeing and rebuilding today. IRC now works in 30 war zones, fragile neighboring states or transit routes where refugees flee. And we resettle 10,000 refugees a year into the United States. We work in 26 US cities and 30 countries. We have 2,000 staff in Syria, 1,100 in South Sudan, 700 in Afghanistan. We're one of the largest employers on the Greek island of Lesbos. Our emphasis is on solutions rather than suffering, on outcomes rather than outrage. But where we work, I have to report to you that humanitarian law is under siege, humanitarian workers are under attack, traditional great powers from the West are turning inwards, the rising powers in the East and elsewhere are not ready to turn outwards, and there we have the great tragedy of the global commons, that what we hold in common from values to security to our environment is managed by no one. And if you think about it, it's a paradox. The world more interconnected than ever before, but nations more insular than ever before. And I see that every day, in all honesty, watching the US presidential debate. But I have to tell you, I watch it too as the debate unfolds about Britain's future in Europe. A debate not just about economics, but also about identity and mindset. Are we part of the modern world, or are we separate from it? I think you know my answer. But if you don't, or if you do and want to argue with me, or conceivably if you want to support me, I hope you'll come and listen to my speech tomorrow at 2 o'clock at Church House in Westminster, where all will be revealed of my views on Europe, and I won't trespass on tonight's occasion by giving you a lecture about Britain and the European Union. But I do want to say this in all seriousness. This community knows the importance of internationalism. This community knows the importance of international responsibility. This community knows the tragic cost of the absence of international responsibility. So this audience seems like the right place to call for generosity of spirit, to call for reason, not rage, in political debate, to argue that when governments fail in their responsibilities, NGOs and citizens need to move into the front line. It was Charles de Gaulle, President de Gaulle, who said that politics is too serious to be left to politicians. And when I stand here looking at this extraordinary gathering of people, deeply committed people, I understand in vivid form that the age-old injunction, he who saves a life saves an entire world, is not a singular act. It's a partnership between all of us. And that's where I want to end this evening. I've spoken to you about the ties that bind us. But there's one further particularly poignant tie, and I want to share it with you. Next year, the community will mark the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. And I know there is an important group from Manchester here tonight. Important because it was an adopted son of Manchester, a giant of a man, Chaim Weizmann, who was the architect of that famous moment in 1917. You all know that Weizmann was sworn in as the first president of the State of Israel on February the 17th, 1949. What perhaps you don't know, or some of you don't know, is that on Weizmann's death, Ben-Gurion asked Albert Einstein to become the second president of the State of Israel. Einstein declined. I went back in preparation for this speech to read the papers, the exchange of letters between Ben-Gurion and Einstein. They're remarkable. What Einstein said was that he was more used to dealing with objects than people. He said he didn't say this, he found relativity theory easier than diplomacy. I hope that for the new ambassador from Israel, life isn't that difficult. Now, what I think very few of you will know is that Albert Einstein was the founder of the International Rescue Committee when he fled to America in 1933. And it's no coincidence that Albert Einstein, a man renowned as a champion for Jewish freedoms, was also the founder of an organization which aims to save lives wherever they need saving, irrespective of religion. In doing so, he reminded us that we, all of us, are heirs to a moral revolution which insists that in every human being there burns a moral flame, which, if nurtured, can defeat the forces of darkness, of intolerance, and of hatred. He reminded us that care for all in society has always been more than an individual or family responsibility. It's nothing less than a communal duty. It's a duty which has allowed the Jewish community to be held in such extraordinary esteem in Britain and to become one of the country's most significant moral voices. That Passover story inspired some of the founding fathers of modern America. It's a story which inspired Nelson Mandela. It's a story whose message of human dignity and commitment inspires me and my organization as well, as we build support for our mission, including through our growing London office, which I hope can engage you and your communities in the years ahead. The long march to freedom is never over, but Anglo Jewry is testimony, as far as I can see, to its possibility, its rewards, and its responsibilities. That, friends, is the spirit in which I extend to you all my own personal wishes for Hag Sameach, and hope that this festival of freedom can inspire us all to promote dignity and decency across the world. Thank you very much indeed.